the language of Germany, for example, or Spain, sort of morphs more and more into English, and then like 1,000 years from now, it's English. In that situation, I could say that yeah, it would be good in some ways, namely by what he's saying here. Sharing language make cooperation and trade easier, and it fosters cultural ties. So that part I can agree with. All right, let's take a look at this. Hot take: language death is actually a good thing. The more people abandon local tongues in favor of widely spoken languages, the better. Sharing a language makes cooperation and trade far easier, and also fosters cultural ties and therefore better relations. Now, what do we think of this take? Personally, I'm not as anti this take as a lot of people on Twitter, on lefty Twitter, is. But I have some thoughts and I want to share them. So first, let me say what I agree with. I actually do agree, or rather, let's take a look at some of the critiques. Some of the critiques here is that he doesn't really take into account that mostly languages die because of genocides. I'm not sure if that's true, but let's say it is, just for argument's sake. In that case, like, he should have maybe worded this a little bit better, because what he is actually saying is that the death of a language and a language or a people being sort of confined into another language sort of makes things easier in a way. It has a utility, that, which is why lingua franca languages is generally good. And that I agree with to some degree. Like, if we exclude the genocide bit, the negative reasons why a language might die out. But for example, a big reason, yeah, I assume so. But like, if we take an example, let's take a local example from Scandinavia. You have Swedish, Danish, and Icelandic. Let's take those three because they sort of have the same base. Back 1,000 years ago, most people in these regions spoke something akin to Icelandic today, namely Norse. And then the Norse language sort of died out, and now we have like Swedish, Danish, Norwegian, and Icelandic. So, what if? And bear with me because this is sort of like a simplified version of events. But what if all of the languages there died and they all got together and started speaking Norwegian or Swedish, like one of them, without the genocide part? That would be generally good because it would be easier for us to understand each other. And it's easy to say then, from a even more macro perspective, that okay, so what if we say this with English? So let's say that Spanish started dying out on its own, and English were to sort of like take over more and more through cultural exports, like through music, through movies, through whatever, books and whatnot. And so the language of Germany, for example, or Spain, sort of morphs more and more into English, and then like 1,000 years from now, it's English. In that situation, I could say that yeah, it would be good in some ways, namely by what he's saying here. Sharing language makes cooperation and trade easier, and it fosters cultural ties. So that part I can agree with. Now the other side, the part that I disagree with, and this is why I don't think that language death in and of itself is necessarily a good thing. So when I'm sure you've heard the term lost in translation before. Now the term lost in translation, I'd never really understood it until shockingly recently, where I always thought that it meant that, oh, the translation just isn't good enough. But it's mainly that there are some sort of like cultural points or pointers or like proverbs or whatever in a specific culture that works in the language of that culture, but it doesn't necessarily work when you translate it. A good example is actually the when we watched the Global Weirdo video last time, the winning goes up in the spinning, which is a term in Norwegian, but it doesn't work at all in the English language, even if you have actually translated it properly. And other like small sayings would be like, in Norwegian, when you don't get to the point, you can say like you walk around the porridge, which doesn't make sense even if you translate it properly. It just means get to the point. And sort of things like that, cultural understandings of a people living in a specific place get sort of filed away if you don't have a specific language in that specific region. And so if everyone was going to speak English, then we would lose something. There's a way of looking at the world that is lost in that sense. So another example would be like gender expression, to take it into a little bit more serious place than like small sayings. But gender expression could also be suffering if the language sort of doesn't reflect how gender can be expressed in a certain culture, if that makes sense. So I don't necessarily disagree with every point he's making, but I still disagree with the overall point, because I also don't think language death is a good thing. I think language death is generally a very bad thing, but having different languages and having useful lingua francas is a better way of looking at it. More people today speak English than ever before, so more people today would be able to communicate with someone from across the world. And as long as the English education is good enough, or as long as people are able to learn English good enough and still keep their own language a separate thing that they can use in their day-to-day life, that's a better solution than letting languages die. Personally, I think it's sad when languages die. A language is a distinct way for a culture to try and capture and represent reality. They have metaphors and ways of thinking that might not be present in other languages. A language reflects a way of life. Yeah, exactly. So that's mainly the reason why I don't enjoy I don't like the concept of language death. Because as a Norwegian that speaks both English and Norwegian fairly well, I would think, thanks to my language, I might have different perspectives on certain cases that people that only speak English can't have, in a way. So at the end of the day, I don't agree with this take. But most people were focusing on the genocidal part of it, and that's also an issue, of course. But that's mainly that he didn't word himself in a very good way, and I don't think that's. He could have rephrased it in a way that been like, language death is a good thing when it, as long as it doesn't entail genocide or something like that. But yeah, and also like another part is that we understand history. We're worse at understanding history if we only get one language to sort of read history through. So if, for example, if you are unable to read Norse, but you are able to read English, so you can only read the translated versions of Snorri, for example, you lose something. It's something about this source that isn't present, and a good sort of contemporary example of this is, let's take a quick look at
you and me will be the best team.
yeah, like Squid Game. For the people who don't know, the only way to properly watch Squid Game is to watch it in Korean, because the English dub, it doesn't manage to actually portray the situation properly, or the show in a proper way. I once read a book written by Robin Kimmerer, don't know who that is. Oh, an indigenous author, called Braiding Sweetgrass. In one of the chapters, she talks about learning the Potawatomi, hope I did that right, language, a language almost lost because, cultural genocide. One very interesting difference from English is how, while English is 70% nouns, the other one is 70% verbs. While English is a language of objects, the other one is a language of actions. Yeah, stuff like that. It actually matters because it gives you different ways to look at the world, and that's why different languages is so important, and that's why the Squid Game dub didn't actually work properly, and a lot of people pointed that out. So yeah.